Right, hello to our YouTube listeners. I've just been live with Periscope, just updating the news. It was looks like a terrorist attack thus far that's happened in the UK, which of course is going to result in another discussion on Periscope, which may or may not make it to YouTube. But in the meantime, this is our Wednesday Wisdom episode. And Wednesday Wisdom, for those of you on YouTube who don't know about our Periscope live discussions, we have our awesome Periscope people here where they ask questions and we disclose what is going on with discovering more and more wisdom with our awesome psych, whose name I don't disclose, but I do call him or her a little talking angel. Okay, let's move on. So we sat down and I discussed with the doc today that it was interesting that I had a cycle of depression a couple of days earlier, and that cycle seems to be a regular cycle. And what happens is that once one enters a depression, it's almost as though the brain needs to delve into that dark place, because once it regenerates itself and comes out of that, you then develop these new ideas, or you've delved into deep and dark thoughts, which you can then verbalize and turn into positive energy later on for people. It makes better podcasts, makes better scopes. It's not something I would wish for anybody, but over the years, learning how to take control of the psychological roller coaster, which some people do have much more than others for various reasons, then it is, it's much better than not having control of it and it having control of you. And that's always the plan, and that's part of looking after that is the Wednesday Wisdom episode, eating right, exercise, but Wednesday Wisdom, of course. So I walked in there and I was already in a good mood. But I did explain to him that Nathaniel from the book, everybody, for those who've read the book, we have Nathaniel. Nathaniel is three people, but one of those three, in real life, I won't tell you his name, but he called me up today. I haven't seen him in a very, very long time, a number of years. And he's sort of a semi-recluse, I guess, with respect to us in Sydney. He lives a little bit of a way out. And he called me up to let me know that he's been watching my YouTube videos, and he is unbelievably proud. He identifies with a lot of the pain, and he said it takes... He didn't use the word balls, but he said it takes a lot of guts to come out and talk about what goes on in one's life, and to be able to share that with other people and help inspire others who might be going through similar or even worse things. And I told him that I really appreciated that, and I really did. The reason is that in the book, what you'll see is that both he and my priest, even though they ended up living vastly, reflective lives, let's just say that. Yeah, it was really awesome. It was really good. Even though they lived almost, let's say they almost literally lived on the opposite side of the tracks. One became a priest, and that was Father Sam Simon from the book, and the other one became Nathaniel, who did not become a priest, let's put it nicely. And yet, I admired both of them very highly. They had an ability to make, number one, myself feel as if I was normal, which was very unusual growing up with undiagnosed autism. You are almost a repellent of humans growing up, and when for those of you who listen to the director's cut of the book, you know what I'm talking about. But they also made everyone else around them feel unbelievably special, and the way that I picked that up was that people would gravitate towards them as though pigeons towards breadcrumbs. And it was fascinating to watch, and it made me recategorize human beings. So it didn't matter that one was a priest and one was someone who was a man of the world, let's say, the opposite, or whatever you want to call it. It mattered to me the level at which they could attract people and have people leaving with what I've now come to learn was smiles, or in a positive mood, or wanting voluntarily to meet these guys. And so I realized that it wasn't particularly, and as I learned this very young, that it wasn't particularly about one's career or that defined them. It was more, in my mind, the metric I used was their ability to attract certain people, but in a positive way. Now, the Wednesday Wisdom doc asked me if I was envious of them, and I thought about that, and I said I was never envious of them. I was envious of a couple of other people who had the ability to attract others, but I've come to notice that they weren't people that, say, had positive energy about them. Thank you very much, bot, for inviting those people. This must be a new bot tactic. Sorry, on Periscope we have interactions with artificial intelligence, and sometimes they can almost come across as human. Periscope.tv/an-autist for those of you who want to catch this live. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Now, the doc asked me how good it felt that I was receiving that compliment. And I said to him, it felt good mostly. And he asked me why mostly. I said, well, it was a little bit scary because I have been receiving such compliments for a long time. They are talking. But now that we add Nathaniel's compliment, which means much, much more based upon, my interaction with him growing up and the fact that I admired him and looked up to him so much. I also looked up to him because he's taller than me. Yes, he's nearly 7 foot tall, this guy. Probably not 7 foot, maybe 6'5", 6'4", 6'5", but still close to 7 foot tall. So I literally looked up to him. I still do, actually. It also scared me, and he asked me why. I said, because it means I have something to lose. And it is almost like I have been endorsed by Nathaniel into carrying this lump of unbelievably precious material. And now I'm responsible for that material. And I said, he asked me why, and I said, it's sort of like, well, those who come onto Periscope and get some benefit from, this knowledge that I've gained from somewhere and sharing it and passing it on. It's almost as though, and some of them have said this, that when I have my down days, it's not good for them, because some of them are hoping that I can stay in a positive mood because my mood affects them, which is not very good. It's almost as though sometimes I'm treading water in a dark, deep ocean, but other people are connected to me via ropes. And so if I stop treading water and I sink, it pulls them down with me. And so I'm obligated to keep treading water. And that is not it's not a pleasant feeling. And the doc said, of course, well, why is it that you feel responsible for them? And I said to him, it's not necessarily because however they take what I say is almost certainly not going to be the way I meant it, and they're going to take it their own way, and some of them might make silly mistakes based upon something I didn't mean, which is obviously what happens all the time, everywhere. It's that other people might believe that it was my message, and so if someone mistakes my message and goes and does something stupid, and then someone else says, oh, the person did something stupid because Gabriel gave them that message, that's a problem. Not because of myself. He asked me why, and I said, well, the problem is that because people know where I live, they could come and hurt my family. And he said, are you not concerned about yourself? And I said, no, not really. I never thought about that. I am concerned about my family. And this brought us on to the fact that Honest Joe, if people know Honest Joe, is a man who, at best, I inherited my OCD from. Now, this person, I would say, is a beautiful person. He is someone with a heart of a child. And so wherever he goes, people love him, in general. Except if they have something to hide, because he normally calls things out straight away. Now, this has caused a problem, because me as a child growing up with someone with OCD, it's extremely, extremely difficult. You're being watched with everything that you're doing, and you're not being acknowledged, and you're being disbelieved if something doesn't fit their narrative. And it's pathological, because basically they'll keep eyeing you when you're growing up. They keep spying on you. They keep checking that all the PowerPoints are switched off. They come into your room and check constantly because they're worried that maybe a PowerPoint will spark electricity and fires will go off. So he's in someone like that with OCD is in a constant state of anxiety. And so when you're around that person, you get this flow-on effect of the anxiety. And as a child growing up for 20 years living at home, it had a disastrous effect. And it's not to blame that person. It's not fair, because that person had a great heart, and I was able to inherit that as well. So there's many good things that you inherit from your parents, but sometimes you can get some very, very bad influences or suffocation, I would say, if growing up with someone with that level of OCD. And so when they are constantly ordering you around and trying to completely take away any sort of autonomy that you have, it causes nothing but distress. And the child within me grew to resent being told what to do for any reason at all. And that's part of that psychological transference. So what happens is that even today, there are issues with boundaries, not only conscious, but unconscious. And this is painful, because the doc noticed that I offered him tea. And I didn't notice that I was crossing a boundary by offering him tea, because I just thought, oh, well, I'm offering you tea, not aware that I was crossing the boundary. But he said, it's interesting that you want to offer me tea without realizing that that's actually crossing a boundary. But when he explained it to me, I was crossing a boundary, because the rule is that I'm not allowed to know anything about the doctor. That includes whether or not they want tea. Now, that might sound tedious, but it's evidence of my behavior being consistent with one who subconsciously seems to not let's say, appreciate boundaries if they seem illogical. Now, this is a massive problem, and I'll tell you why. So I've spoken about this previously, but there are other people who know this. There are people who drive all day for many, many years, like myself, plus have a high... we just had a question on Periscope by a beloved Patreon, Samira Wild. Guys, on YouTube, go to Samira Wild. It's WYLD. If you find her, just Google her, and you'll find her Twitter. Itam book is here. And from there, you can then get her book. If you're interested, at least just have a look. She's a Patreon, so I'm going to tell you. You might get sick of me telling everyone after a while, but we'll do it for a little while. All right. So what were we saying? Oh yes. So we come back to those such as Nathaniel Itambuka, such as myself, those who drive constantly, and for me, it's been my job for a long time. Okay, good. And it's also with the autism having a extremely high level of attention to detail, and with the savant section that has a high level of perception, which is focused when it comes to driving. And those of you who've seen my piano skills and other things, you understand the analogy there. It makes it very difficult sometimes to, if a rule is illogical. So, for example, there was an accident or something, and so it required me to go around the accident. But to do so, I had to cross a double line. But it seemed quite illogical to actually sit there behind the accident, especially because, excuse me, I could see the timing of all of the lights. I knew exactly the streets. I knew who was coming and who wasn't. I knew that there was no risk for me to do that. The problem is that has been explained to me twice now, which is very difficult to understand, is that you can't do something that is reasonable for you if it violates a law that other people could not violate, because they would actually not have the skill, thank you, to actually not do that without getting into an accident. And so you have to abide by rules which, when applied to you, might look stupid, but because you're part of society, the law can't tell which one is able to actually go around the double line and which person's incapable. So everyone has to follow that rule. It's very hard in my head to square that. But what happened is, at the time, that never even came to my mind. It was like completely logical, hey, to go around and do what we had to do. So the psych was explaining that you subconsciously have a rejection of certain boundaries that seem quite stupid to you. And that's what a child does. And that's what happened with you when you had someone with OCD who gave you an unbelievable amount of rules, almost like trying to dump tons of rocks for you to carry. And so you have developed this response to authority, which is partially emotional, which is related to the fact that you as a child was very, very subjugated, suffocated because of this OCD mentality. And you were not validated, and the fact that your mother was unbelievably busy and becoming successful and had her own things to do, for which she should not feel guilty ever. Okay, it just so happened that way at the time. She was doing what she thought was correct. It resulted in the child version of myself not realizing or not being validated from either side. And so this child developed a hatred for their father, but it wasn't, the child knew that the world loved his father, and so he was seen to be the troublemaker, because how could you not love such a lovable person? Even though what other people couldn't see was having to live with such a suffocating pathological disorder of someone having OCD is extremely unbearable, almost extremely unbearable for a child. And so that hatred turned to myself. So I ended up hating myself over the feelings that I was having towards this person that most people were saying was an amazing person. And it was quite amazing that actually can live on 30 years later and result in you saying, look at this stupid rule. It doesn't make any sense. Why am I being told to do this? You take it as a personal attack. And what we discovered, and this is something I discovered a couple of months ago, but we brought it back, was that even braking in a car, and I gave up speeding about 7 years ago, after a little period of obsessive speeding. I gave it up, and let me get back to what I was saying. Even till today, slowing down gives you a little bit of pain every single time, because you know that you're. I'll tell you, the way that he phrased it was quite brilliant. Let me find it here. So braking is pain because of being excessively hindered. That's what it seems like, you're being excessively hindered, and so it brings pain, which was quite amazing. The next part we spoke about was the fact that this ignoring of the situation made things even worse. The tensions increased when I was about 30 with my mother, because we had my younger brother who had not also, being on the spectrum, also didn't develop into an adult, even though he was 27 years old, as quickly as most other people do. So intellectually he was, but not emotionally. So he would spend his time at home, not functioning in society, even in his mid-20s, which is quite, well, it's sort of usual these days, but it's quite unusual in general, I would still say. It was much more unusual, when was it? It was about 7 years ago, so roughly 6-7 years ago. And so it was up to myself to force him to come and work with me, because I knew that I had to get him out of the house, and it angered me at the time that no one else was listening. And the reason I was upset, because I felt as though my mother was making the same mistake she made with me. But with me, I gave her a pass because she couldn't have known. It was her first child, and she had her own things that she had to deal with. But the second child, and it made me feel, upset at her at the time, which I've since, there's no issue anymore. And that resulted in, let's just say, a lot of emotional stunting with my brother, who's not even as autistic as myself. So it's an unusual situation where, your genetic predisposition to autism can be masked by how much you are immersed into society to learn to understand human behavior. And it can go the other way too. You could have just a little bit of autism, and then, like my brother, and have a better understanding of human beings. But if you're not exposed to them, then your understanding is stunted as well. So he started after me, but he's caught up, much more quickly, because he has a much more intuitive understanding of how to make friends and negotiate with people and understand hidden meanings, etc. And that might have actually propelled me to want to learn human behavior much more than he did, which comes back to me liking Nathaniel and admiring Nathaniel because of his ability to have people around him. I had an ability to repel people as a young person growing up, not understanding how to behave, how to walk, how to speak. My speech was delayed, etc., etc. Where was I going with this? 1 second, let me pause this. So I think it had some sort of rebound effect. As we know, as we go into the book, the amount of torture that this kid has gone through forces him to realize that there's something wrong with him. Whereas someone like my brother, who's on the spectrum, but not as much by any stretch, did not probably have the necessity to have to learn human behavior, because he sort of had enough in there to not be mistreated to such an extent. Now, is that the end of Wednesday Wisdom? Conscious versus unconscious motivations for offering the tea to the doc. This is interesting, as I said this before, but what I didn't mention was that the offering of the tea to the doc, I had a conscious reason for it. My conscious reason was, he was in there, I was making tea for me, I may as well bring him one, because I've seen him drink tea before. Why should he have to get up and get one? Now, without self-reflection, that is the reason. It would never have occurred to me that it could have been possible that I wanted to connect with him, despite the fact that the boundary states that we're not supposed to have any connection. And so we don't know if that's the truth or not. It could be an unconscious motivation. That this is the part of reflection, and it's painful. It's painful to think that could be what was actually going on. But that's the whole point of self-reflection. And one cannot change without that self-reflection to then be aware, or potentially be aware, that they might be doing that. There is a pattern that I'm doing that. It doesn't mean that that's my motivation, but it's consistent with that. Now, what else have we not discussed? That's about it, guys. I will say bye to YouTube and come back to Periscope. YouTube, it was a pleasure. That's our Wednesday Wisdom for this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and then like again. All right, until next time, YouTube, take life one smack at a time, and we will see you shortly.
Bullies come in all forms. Jamil was an autistic savant, motivated by a desperate need to help others. Language, music, and math just made sense, and his genius led him straight to the top of the firm. But this is the real world, where perceptions can lead to tragedy. Speaking Human is the true story of a gifted man misunderstood as sinister, who paid the ultimate price. Speaking Human, The Tragedy of the Retarded Genius by Adrian Ferguson. Where there is violence, there is also hope. Speaking Human, available now at Amazon.com.